So automation has been pretty an interesting experience for me in terms of when I first started actually building automation back in 2000. I mean, I guess technically I was doing some automation stuff in like 20, what would that have been? 2013, 20. I mean, either way. Um, So building automation is interesting because you're effectively taking a workflow and needing to, similar to like how you write a test case, you're planning out what the steps are, and then because it's automation, validation is a lot cheaper to do, so you can just put validation like in between every single step that you have. There is some differences in philosophy around should you do that? Should you focus the automation just on the very like specific thing you're automating? The moment you start getting into like end-to-end automation is where you then get into like how much do you validate on? Because like, do you need to add validation for like controlling the workflow of the automation so that it's following a specific path, or is the application that you're writing the automation for performant enough to be able to just, zip straight to where you need to go to do whatever sort of test you're writing? So there's multiple instances of things that need to be thought about in terms of like, um, how much validation do I put? Where is the validation? What is the validation doing? Like, is this validation already covered in another uh automation or another like piece of automation that was written? Because then it's like, am I just duplicating effort by like having five or six different test cases all validating that like a button is present before clicking the button, but then thinking about the action of clicking the button, you need the button there to click. But what if the automation framework that you're using can click things that are outside your viewport? And so that's where you then get into deeper thoughts on like how closely am I emulating the user experience versus like what am I actually validating against? Because if a button is present, that's one thing. If a button is present in the viewport, that's another thing. If a button is present in the viewport where it's quote unquote supposed to be, that's a completely different thing. Like each of those are like different levels of validation that you would need to think about, because it's simple enough to just say, is the button there? Click the button. Or is the button visible? Click the button. Or is the button within this other element in this specific spot? Then click the button. And so it's interesting problems to have to think about, along with like how many test cases are you building for a particular feature? Are you going to be creating separate end-to-end test cases? And if you do, then are you like reusing pieces from other things? Um, there's, let's see, there's the like how frequently is this automation going to be ran? Is the what sort of setup is needed to run the automation, or what sort of setup is needed for a particular test case? Like, can you, um, is like the setup that needs to be done something that can only be done, well, quote unquote, only be done through the UI, or are you able to utilize the API to like set something up to speed up the run of a test case? Like, if you need data there first, then you could send out a request to get the data ready to then navigate there uh, in the UI. And then, yeah, so all of that has been quite an interesting exploration and experience that I've had, is like thinking about all those things. And then outside of that, the um another piece that is something that I don't know how frequently it's really thought about, but like, if how much work is then being redundant, because it's like the writing of the steps of a test case, or writing the steps of automation, there's, I believe it's like gherkin or cucumber, where you're writing things out so that like a PM or PO or like somebody can create a user story with like specific like human readable language, and that can then be like translated into, this is like the functions and like automation that is then ran based off of that like human readable thing. But there needs to be consistency in like how tests are written. Like, when you have your acceptance criteria, you could say like, you could make sure that the way that that's written is consistent, so that you can make the creation of the automation all that much more streamlined. Although nowadays there's the whole argument for like AI doing all of that, and that's like a completely different topic that I'm still thinking deeply about and haven't really come to too many solid thoughts on. Uh, but yeah, automation is interesting, especially just the concept of automation, because it's like automating a automating something that has like consistent steps. Because if it doesn't have like a consistent, and maybe that's not the right term, but it's like knowable or predictable steps, makes automation easier, and that predictability is what you can then run over and over and over again to say like, is this thing there? Yes, no. Can this thing be clicked? Yes, no. Like, it can just be ran over and over and over again to make sure that as new things are implemented, we avoid regressions to where things become broken. And so it's been an interesting experience creating automation and just like observing how different people approach it, since there is sort of a spectrum of like, how much or how little do you need to have that level of confidence.